see the thumbs up and the light's not on, so there we go.
They are starting the survey.
Good evening and welcome to the Monday, March 9th Maplewood City Council Manager Workshop. City Manager Coleman, would you please do the roll call for us?
Certainly. Councilmember Neblett? Here. Councilmember Smith?
Here.
Councilmember Juniman?
Here.
Mayor Abrams?
Here.
And note for the record that Councilmember Knutson is not with us this evening.
Thank you. Do I have a motion for the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Neblett, seconded by Smith. The motion to approve the agenda, is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passed. We have no unfinished business tonight. We do have two items under new business. The first one is the intent to close the meeting to consider a purchase offer to sell city-owned property at 2501 London Lane. Council members, do I have a motion in that regard?
So moved.
Do you want to read the motion for the record? It's on page, okay,
Pursuant to, Madam Mayor,
thank you.
pursuant to Minnesota Statute Sections 13D.05 Subdivision 3C, I hereby motion to close the regular meeting and go into closed session to consider purchase offers or counteroffers for city-owned property located at 2501 London Lane East.
Moved by Neblett, seconded by Juniman. The motion to close the meeting pursuant to state statute. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. That motion passes. And so we are going to go into closed session. We are back from closed session. Moving on in our agenda, the next item under new business is the employee survey result. Mr. Sable, I believe this is your topic. And City Manager Coleman, too.
It takes a couple seconds.
It's only one.
It's only one
There's
slide.
this one and the one after.
Do you want me to start? Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, Mr. Sable and I want to share the results of our 2019 employee survey. And as all of you know, we try to be a very strengths-smart organization, and we've been really working hard at accentuating the strengths of our employees. And our goal is to have everybody more engaged. And we believe that people who focus on their strengths are more productive and they're happier employees. And it's just a funner, better place to work. So with that, we did a survey in December. I'm going to have Mike run through what the numbers look like. I think the biggest thing that I would like you to kind of take away is when you think back to the budget, we spend 75% of our general fund on our employees. And so we want to make sure that our employees are satisfied, that they have, they're paid well and they're happy in their positions. And so this is a really good way for us to gauge that. And I'll let Mike go through the specifics, but after that, I'll be here to answer questions too that you might have about that.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and Council members. Mike Sable, Assistant City Manager, HR Director. As the City Manager shared, we chose to engage in an employee survey. The most recent employee survey was in December of 2016 and led into early 2017. So this was a perfect opportunity for us to engage the workforce. When we looked at the available survey tools that were out there, we could have recreated some ones that we had done in the past. We could have created our own one and done it electronically. But what I think we wanted to really leverage was the value that the Gallup organization provides to us. And so Gallup is a nationally recognized survey firm. They have done, last estimate was around 35 million engagement surveys around the globe, 25 million in the United States. So it gives us a nice comparison benchmark that we can use. And they've also done some really good statistical research as to why they have picked only 12 questions. And so they picked 12 questions that really get at how to address engagement in the workforce, how to identify it. And they really think of it as kind of four building blocks. One is basic needs. One is the second layer up, then is individual perspective. Do they have what they need as an individual? The third layer is then how do you work as a team? How does the organization work as a team? And then the highest, next level, the fourth level, is do they have opportunities for growth and development? And so it kind of builds, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs from psychology a long time ago, it's that same kind of piece that you have the core functions, you have your individual needs, your team needs, and then you have your self-actualization growing. So what I did want to do is just share the results very broadly at a high level. You have this as an attachment as well. This is the city's overall scores on a 1 to 5 scale, and if you look in the upper right quadrant there of your sheet, you can see that the city of Maplewood has a 3.86 score out of a 5-point scale. That is neither good nor bad. It is just simply a benchmark for where we are. It's a snapshot in time for where our organization is. The other piece that I wanted to share that with you is in that upper left quadrant. It called that engagement index. It's the green and gray and black line. And that for us is really our engagement index score. And what that tells us is that 40% of our employees are engaged in work. And engaged employees, you can sort of develop your own descriptors, but those are the folks with a can-do attitude, a really positive spirit, who show up engaged and enthusiastic about driving not only their personal performance, but also their organizational performance forward. You have that broader category in the middle at 48% who are not engaged. Now that's folks who are still here, they're still doing the work, they're still showing up, but there's some sort of missing connection for what's inspiring them. And then in organization, we have a 12% that are actively disengaged. You can think of that as folks who may be just dissatisfied at work, maybe dissatisfied at home, but they are 12%. And what I wanted to do is give you sort of what is our national comparison. In the United States, the average score for companies across the United States is 31% engaged. So we are at about 30% higher than the national average in terms of that one category. The middle category for a national level is around 53, 54%, maybe as much as 56%, and that includes all workers in all industries. And then that last category, doing the math, actively disengaged, the nationwide average is around 19%. And so for us, this is a snapshot in time, and it shows that we are, slightly above where the national average is. And so for this is a really helpful benchmark for us. I think it's for me as someone who's worked in the public sector for a long time, it's not a surprise. We're often driven by mission, and so we have this sense of obligation to strengthening our communities. And so being a little bit number in the engaged category, I think, is slightly higher and is to be expected. The last little bit, there's a little, it talks about that engagement index ratio, and that shows a 3.3 to 1 ratio. That means for every actively disengaged person, you have 3 who are engaged. And for one of the things that I think are helpful to help explain what that means, imagine if you are in a canoe and you have 3 people rowing one way and 1 rowing against. You'll make progress, but it might be a little disjointed. And so the higher that index, the faster and further you're going to go as an organization. And that's something that, as a management team, we've kind of talked about is how do we make that ratio higher, either by inviting disengaged folks to join the team and be engaged, or to be successful elsewhere if that is warranted in those cases. But really kind of making sure that that index is high and strengthens the organization as a whole. So I'm going to stop there and see who has any questions about any of the items in that kind of upper category. Sure.
Final comments, too. Any questions?
Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor.
I was looking at the numbers.
For the benchmarking, both this and for the percentile benchmarking, I assume that's across all participants in these kinds of surveys. Do we have peer benchmarks as well for like organizations? Is that something Gallup offers?
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Smith, not specifically to local government. We have asked our peers around the region who have done it. I know a handful of folks who have done it, but I haven't seen their results.
Yeah,
So I can't.
and that would be not statistically significant, but it'd be nice if they broke that out by vertical or something.
I do know that I attended the Gallup conference last summer, and that was one of the discussion items, was there a way to differentiate types of businesses and public versus private? And I think they'll probably get there, but right now they're not yet.
Councilmember Niblett.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple of questions. You said that, Mr. Sable, you said that this is a benchmark. Do you know when you're planning on doing another one?
Every other year.
Oh, good.
And so I was going to talk about some of our follow-up things that we have planned, unless there's
Okay.
other questions about the data.
I do have one
Okay.
other question. Surveys for me are good, and they're,
Yeah.
you have that factor, okay? And when I'm looking at the engagement index ratio, and I'm looking at that 48%, I'm also thinking about the fact that so many people, and I know it's just one factor, so many people are engaged in their health and working out. And I'm just wondering how you take 80% of your people who are engaged in that
wellness?
way.
Yeah.
How does that represent, how is that represented here in that 48%? That's, and I know that's not it's just a hypothetical question, I guess, if you will, but
Yeah,
that's why I have a hard time with surveys, because it's like,
They don't
you have
tell
an
you
unknown
everything.
factor. They don't.
Right.
They really don't.
I will say that the management team, we've had a large discussion about those people who are just in the middle.
Yeah.
They do their jobs. They're not causing trouble, but they're just focused on their jobs. And I think Mike had an employee say, well, what do you have to do to be engaged? I'm engaged in my job, and I get my job done, and I do it very well. And so that's okay. So like the wellness thing, I think that took us from, we started that in 2010, 2011, with 10% participation, and all we required was that you go for your annual physical. And now we're up to 80%. We exceeded that before. We thought we had another year to get there, and we already got there. But it's much more robust program, and we have more people, and it just makes it better. And so I think that's our goal with this, too. It's a starting point. We can look at the things that have come up. I think the one thing that we're paying a lot of attention to with the survey is recognition. That's where we really didn't hit the mark. And I have to tell you, that's a really tough one. After we did the survey in 2016, it was the same thing. And we had focus groups. We had 5 groups of 10 people from cross departments talking about recognition, and we couldn't agree on anything because it means something different to everyone. So now we're trying to shift that to recognition can be me saying, Sylvia, nice job today. Or thanking Ellie for the great job she did bringing cookies and celebrating that we paid off the bridge. It doesn't have to be a lot. And so we're trying to instill that into, the line staff, that it doesn't have to come from the top. And a lot of the employees don't want it to come from the top. We try to do a shout out on our intranet page, and it's very sporadic. And we know there's all kinds of really good things that should be recognized happening almost every day, especially in our police department, but we don't hear about that. Public Works we hear a little bit more of because they have more interface with all of us. But so we have to do some training about that, I think. Are there any more questions? Otherwise, I'll talk about some of our
Councilmember
follow-up.
Juniman has a question too.
Actually, I have a comment. I'm with Sylvia. It's like surveys are helpful and all that, but they're surveys. But it is nice to see that they feel that their coworkers are committed to quality work, because that's a good symptom to have that can spread. And then the last one, I really think is a really good thing. This last year, I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. That's important.
Yeah, that's how you
And,
keep people. Yeah.
as far as the whole engage thing, I don't know how important that really is. And how do you measure engagement, like you said? And people have to make choices in their life, many choices, obviously, many more than they used to, on what they can expend energy on, consciously being engaged, if you will. And if people are here and doing a really good job, they are engaged to the level that we need them to be. It's almost not, I think that's almost not worth noting. It gets to be it's like fourth grade raising your hand every time. I'm not sure that's effective.
One more second. I wanted to make just a comment that I really focused on question 6 and question 12 together, because in looking at the environment, it really makes a difference, I think, that there is someone at work who encourages my development, that we, as a city, as an employer, are providing opportunities for people to develop their skills, their abilities to the max, and then the learn and grow. That seems the development and the learn and grow go together. And I really recognize that we're providing those opportunities, and people will avail themselves of those opportunities to the extent that they want to.
Right.
And in my mind, in looking at these numbers, and there's always a grain of salt to take with a survey, but looking at that, is this, if so many people feel that this is a place where they can develop, where they can grow their skills, if they want to, but perhaps maybe there is some correlation between those people who are actively disengaged and maybe some who are not engaged fully. They just don't want, they don't want to avail themselves of those possibilities or those opportunities. I don't know. I think it's very helpful to look at this. I think that is an interesting question about recognition, because it means something different to everybody. I see that as something for department heads to really work on those skills, because they have the direct contact with staff on a daily basis. And, in terms of our department heads, Ms. Coleman, that really is yours in terms of recognition, because you would have more daily contact with your department heads than with everybody else. But my question is, so what are we going to do with this information now? What's next with this?
That was exactly the question I needed to ask, so thank you. So after we got the employee survey done, we did have all employee meetings. We had 4 of them. They were pretty well attended. We had a large part of our employees show up for those. And what we did at the employee meeting was to share the results of the survey. And we also talked about recognition and some of the things that we were hoping to build on from the survey. But we also talked about the 2020 budget and had them help them understand how hard it is for you to prioritize how we spend the money. And so Ellie and Steve put together a program that we used in our Lead Academy where they actually had to problem solve. They had to pick what would get funded and what wouldn't. And so we walked through that with our employees too to help them understand that it's not easy developing a budget and a capital improvement plan, and there are trade-offs, and it's a tough one. And we balance that with the tax levy. And so we're really trying to communicate that to our employees as well. We did have some good feedback. Since that, we also are planning to do, we're actually kicking off training with the management team and our supervisors to help them ask better questions and more meaningful questions about what does recognition look like, and kind of dive into these questions. One of the really beautiful things about using Gallup is they have a whole stack of training materials that go with this. So you can focus on question 1 or 6, and there's all kinds of conversation starters and ideas for engaging people in conversations that address what we found in the survey. So that's really our main focus at the moment. We are going to be asking, I think, some of the supervisors to work with maybe some of the management team members to look at that recognition piece. I don't think it worked very well to have it come from the employee level. It just petered out because no one could agree, and there were 20 ideas, and none of them were, there was like buy the people hats. It's like, well, that's not exactly what we need to do. We don't really have a budget for buying hats. So we need to look at that more. And we're trying to make our employee appreciation event a little more, try to change that up every year too. And I think most of you have been to one of those at least. And so we do try to do some things. I think we can do better at that. In addition to working with the management team and supervisors, I am about to embark on focus groups, where I'm going to go to each of the department and randomly select 6 employees from each department and just sit down with them for an hour and have a conversation with them. How are things going? What are your challenges? What's going well? Sort of the same questions that Brian suggested we use last year in my review. They're very good questions. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to start doing that. I'm not sure that everybody will be pleased about attending, but we're actually going to make it mandatory. If your name is picked, you're going to show up and you're going to talk to the city manager for an hour. And we might get some people that won't like it, and some people will, and it'll probably be the same kind of ratio you see up on the wall. So we're trying that. And then finally, every quarter I do a lunch and learn on strengths. And just last week we did one on the relationship building domain. And so we had 26 people come to that. And we put in tables in here, and we have lunch, and we watch some videos and talk about our strengths. And it was really good. I was telling Mayor Abrams about this. A lot of the participants, 6 of them, they were fire EMT guys. So they're new employees. They have a lot of energy, enthusiasm. But what's really interesting is out of the 6, 5 of them had positivity. And so they're just, you were there, you saw them. They were just really happy, positive people. We worked well as a team, and everything's great. It's so fun because they just bring such new energy to our employees. So that was super fun. And so I do that every quarter. We do some things. We have a book club where it's open to everybody. We do that maybe once or twice a year. So we're trying to do things that engage people. And what you find is that 20%, that 26 people that showed up, those are the people that are actively engaged. They're the ones that want to be involved and want to be part of the organization. So those are some of the things we're doing. I hope it works and pays off for us. I think it will. You can already see that when you start talking strengths, people like to talk strengths. They like to talk about what they do well.
One additional thought in terms of recognition and things that we may do to it. It seems to me that the mission and purpose, question number 8, goes along with question number 4.
Yeah.
Because recognition is all about, in the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. And the mission or purpose of my organization makes me feel my job is important. recognition and feeling that their job is important seem to go together, and those are categories that I think have been identified that we need some work on, and
I truly believe that that is a place that we can do more, and I think a lot of it ties to our strategic plan. The more that we can push the strategic plan into a conversation and have all of the employees engaged in that strategic plan, the more people know what their purpose is every day. They have a playbook, and they know what they're supposed to be working on. And so I think that'll help a lot, too. Mike, did you have any comments to add on that? That's...
Mayor and council members, I think the only comment I would make around mission and purpose is sometimes we get so fixed on performing the task, we lose track of why we're doing things. And so I made a comment that the passport counter shrinks the world because people now can, because they came to our counter, now get access to the rest of the world. And if we think of it in sort of grander terms, it's a little bit inspirational. And so occasionally reminding folks that it's not just making a widget or turning a crank. Some kid is going to learn how to build a skill in one of our park programs that they would have never had an opportunity to. And you have to sort of step back and look at the big picture. And I think opportunities to remind folks that there's a bigger story about what public service does for people. And so that's a reminder, I think, for us to sort of actually talk about why this work matters and why we do it in the first place. And it's not just emphasize turning the crank, but actually changing lives.
those are very good points. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to speak a little bit in defense of surveys. I spend a lot of my day steeped in data and surveys and this sort of thing. And, you know, we have a saying that, particularly around market sizing, but a lot of these kinds of things, and I think surveys include, is that every survey is wrong. It's just a question of to what degree is it wrong, right? And once you can sort of take that as a truth, it's a little easier to get to it. But it is, I'm particularly glad we went with Gallup because there's a tremendous amount of science behind this kind of work, and the way that they ask these questions are really critical. And then I'm assuming that engagement index is an aggregation of the scoring, which to me is even more powerful. So it's looking at all 12 questions and then scoring based on how those fall out. So, you know, this sort of thing to me is most useful when you look for trends or comparisons. You know, like whether something is in the percentile of 55 or 61 is, it might be, it might not, you know, it's close. I've done dozens of market sizings at work, and we're always like 20 to 22% of the market, no matter how we do it. You know, we're somewhere in there. So kind of trying to pick it apart for those trends, I think, is one of the most interesting things. And what I'm starting to see here, the ones that are in the 50s or 60s seem to be largely around what's immediately around the employee. So it's their boss, it's their materials, it's someone, one person cares about me, I have a friend. It's that very personal part of their job, which is good, because that's hard to fix if it's bad. The ones that are lower are the ones that are more cultural. And I think the recognition piece is, to me, very cultural. And I think I applaud the efforts that you guys have been putting out of doing the recognition events and those kinds of programs and things like that. But to me, I think what really moves the needle there is people saying thank you. Yeah. And people pointing out good work on a daily basis, one-to-one or in small meetings, and just fostering that culture. That also comes top-down, because people see that behavior and emulate it. But I think that, you know, as you think about how you're doing leadership development and those kinds, and I know you think about this, but finding ways for those moments of recognition, I think, are even more important than the big kind of programmatic ones. But I think I'm really glad you guys went with Gallup more than just, I think that expertise and science behind is really important. So nice work, and I think it's good stuff.
Good comments, thank you. Councilmember Niblett, and then
Thank you,
Councilmember
Mayor.
Drinman.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. That was really good. I hadn't thought of a survey in those terms, but I like that. I do. And I agree with something that Councilmember Smith said very, very directly, in that this is about the one-on-one thank you. Nice job. Because it just makes a difference. And so in light of that thought, thank you. Seriously, thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for keep plugging away at it, because that's the only way that it's going to change. And this is good stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Neblett.
You're welcome, Mayor.
Kumbaya.
We need the marshal.
Councilmember Juniman. Do you want to close us out on
I
this?
couldn't resist, I'm sorry, but.
That was good.
Knock us off our pedestal.
No, I
Or
agree with you.
spoil the
that-
moment.
No, I agree that the one-on-one stuff is more important. And what Brian said a while ago about the whole culture thing, if you think about how ingrained from 50, 60 years ago still hangs around, the whole ingrained attitude about wanting recognition but not wanting it to be public recognition. I mean, that's just been ground in for years. And so, like, some people don't come to that lunch because they just can't. I mean, it's just something, they don't realize there's a buried cynicism in that somewhere. But, I mean, they would love to, and they like that their name is on the program, but they just can't. And I think that comes from years of exposure to it not being done or not wanting it done or whatever. And so it's a little hard to measure, but I think we measure those by the people who come and enjoy themselves and thank us for doing it. I think that's just, and it's just one piece.
Yeah.
And I agree with Councilmember Neblett too. The one-on-one thing is really, I think, the most important. And I think doing the strengths has made a difference in that. And the place I've really noticed it is over there. How in the police department, you'll hear them giving each other a hard time, but it's a positive hard time, you know, about something that they did, and it kind of spread, and, you know, so that's all really positive stuff. And it doesn't even necessarily show up when they fill this out, but if you hear it and you know what's going on, then you know it's working.
Yeah. Mayor, just a couple more closing comments, if I
Certainly.
could.
City Manager Coleman.
There was some other data that we didn't share with you, and that was the rate of return. We got 65% of our employees filled out the survey. They also, some of them identified, some did not, as to how long they've been at the city. 5 years, 5 years or less, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and then above. And it's interesting, the most engaged people or happiest people were the people who have been here the shortest amount of time. In addition to that, on the one-on-one, you're making one-on-one kind of changes and culture of thank you and gratitude. I'll just say that I think 2 or 3 of our department heads, shortly after we had this discussion at our all-employee meetings, went out and bought packs of thank you cards. So that, you know, baby step, you know, just a little step at a time, and we'll get there. As to the culture thing, I would like to thank you, because really the culture of this organization starts with your leadership. And so when we're up here and you're doing the great work that you're doing, and you respect each other, and you come to good decisions, and you're deliberative, you take the time to listen to the residents, that trickles down. And people see that you're out there doing a good job and you're in the community. And I think that helps them feel better about, well, I'm out in the community all the time, and so are you. And so I think it really does start with you guys, so thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Sorry, we got time.
We got time, we can just keep
Yeah.
it coming.
I just want to say too, I think in the past, I've talked about things about making sure that we are willing to talk about what's going well and what's not going well, and being really okay about that. And, you know, and having it be a safe thing for us to talk about. It's, and I want to also recognize the courage it takes to do this kind of a survey, and to put it up in a public meeting on television, and talk to us, not only us, but residents too, about, hey, there's places where we're doing well, there's places where we need to do work. And it does take leadership courage to do that too, which I think is really admirable and important, and I know something that we can all continue to work on, because it's hard. So, thank you.
I guess I'll just close it out with a comment about my observations about leadership. And now that I am retired from my law practice, having worked with a number of employers over the years, the employers that I observed to be the most healthy, high-functioning workplaces were the ones that actively cared about what their employees thought. They were also the employers that, in order to really excel, they had to acknowledge that sometimes things don't work out. People make mistakes, and there are things that, unforeseen circumstances come up, and it's really, I think, filtering that down, that's just kind of part of life, but really it's what we do with that when those kinds of things happen, that otherwise employees are not going to take those risks, to make those leaps of faith, really excel at their jobs and be at their most creative, unless they know that, okay, if this is a misstep here, then you know what, we tried it, we analyzed it, it didn't work, we're going to find a different way, and that it's basically okay for failure to happen, and it has to happen if an organization is really going to be healthy and high functioning and really do its very best work. And so I see that in our leadership team. I see it in our council at truly how hard we work. We may not agree on everything, and we may have to step back, and we're willing to try things. We're also willing to say, okay, if it didn't work quite this as well as we wanted to, then let's make some changes, some edits, and then let's move forward. And I think that's how we get to be the very best city that we can possibly be. So this is really helpful I think, for all of us. And so with that, I'll have my little kumbaya moment and say thank you very much, everyone. And I see no more lights on. Thank you for presenting this. I think it's really important.
And let's face it, we are better than every other place.
We want to be our best. We're not comparing to others. We want to be our best. So with that, I will close our workshop, and we will reconvene at 7 o'clock for our council meeting.
Gosh, we had a lot of time.
Thank you.
Who wants to go for a